historic times. Historic times, prophetic times, will require of you and me, going forward, a spiritual response of the highest magnitude. The response will include you and me searching our hearts to see if there be any wicked way, and to lead us in the path of His righteousness and His holiness. Be ye holy, for I am holy. We are living in those kinds of days in which, in order to make it through, we will have to be holy as He is holy. This presentation is called the 2008 Credit Crises, the final transfer of America's financial sovereignty. That's exactly what is happening. The events of the last 13 months, nice Masonic number, 13, are historic, prophetic, catastrophic. We are in the midst of great and grave major change that builds on many historic things happening, such as the tax code, the Federal Reserve in 1913, the crash of 1929, the nationalization and the things that Roosevelt set in place that led to the United Nations and the whole structure of world government that we know today. So we are now seeing individually in the United States of America, the last bastion, the last wall in the free world crumble. We are seeing the structure of our government change. The function of government is now changing. Rights as individuals are changing. The retention of purchasing power is going out the wall. The ability to survive is the bottom line. It's no longer about making money on your money. This week changed that. It is about preserving money. It's also about their control of money and how they control the world. If you control the money, you control the world. Very simple. Control the money, control the world. Who controls it? International bankers, the Morgans, the Schiffs, the Rothschilds, many other names. Central banks, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank. Investment bankers, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, just to name a few. This is a picture in the Financial Times from March 22nd, 23rd of this year. It called these men the 4 new sheriffs of Wall Street. The first 2 are from the Federal Reserve. Ben Bernanke, the new Federal Reserve Chairman. Timothy Geithner. Timothy Geithner used to be an under Treasury Secretary. I believe I interviewed him a couple years back. Robert Steele, he came from Goldman Sachs. I'm sorry, this is, Robert Steele. Oh, that's Robert Steele. I'm one behind. Robert Steele, this is Hank Paulson. These 2 men came from Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs, a major international banking firm. The new 4 sheriffs of Wall Street. That means they supersede Congress. Nathan Rothschild from the Rothschild Bank in England said, "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to fuel the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." There are evil men who lust to control the monetary system of the world, using their power and influence to put down kings, princes, and presidents. God, however, rules in the affairs of men. You all know what Isaiah says, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is He, the Lord God, creator of heaven and earth, that sits upon the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are as grasshoppers, and God brings the princes of this world and the judges to nothing." We can know this in our head, but we are going to have ample time in the future to learn it in our heart. These are just some of the headlines. The Financial Times, Banks in Crises, from September 15th. We have seen, starting with December of 2007, central banks make joint assault. This is the beginning of a global central bank. For years I've been talking about a global tax, a global currency, a global stock exchange, a global central bank, and global regulatory system. It's no longer coming. We are there. We are here. World government is no longer coming. It's been here. It is now manifesting itself, believe it or not, in what happened this week in Wall Street. March 22nd, mortgage crisis talks underway. June, regulators to rethink complex debt rules. September 8th, U.S. seizes mortgage giants, that's Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. WAMU forces out CEO, Washington Mutual, huge savings and loan. 9/15, Lehman prepares for bankruptcy. Bank of America agrees to buy Merrill Lynch. UBS, that's UBS Warburg, German bank, aims for speedy U.S. deal. The vultures are coming in. September 16th, that's this week if I recall, it's been such a fast week. Stocks plunge, crisis intensifies at AIG, largest insurance company in the world. They're at risk. That same day, $700 billion in shareholder values vanish. September 17th, Goldman's earnings slide 70%. The U.S. to lend AIG $85 billion in exchange for stake in firm. Lawmakers seek market intervention, proposal to include tighter regulation. We see in this morning's New York Times, it basically tells us just that. The vultures are coming in, just like they did with the savings and loan when they went under because they held mortgages of large commercial buildings. And they set up the Resolution Trust. The government did. They moved all those assets from savings and loans into the Resolution Trust Corporation. No accountability to government, no balance sheets, zero. Nothing was made public about what they did. So who do you think bought all that commercial real estate 20 years ago or so? It says here, top officials at the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve, we are not talking Congress, began discussing with congressional leaders a plan to buy up, you can, instead of 5 cents on the dollar, it just might be 2 cents. Vast numbers of distressed mortgages held by ailing financial institutions. While the details of the plan remain to be worked out, the discussions could result in the biggest bailout in U.S. history and the most direct commitment of taxpayer money so far in the worst financial crisis that Fed and Treasury officials say they have ever seen. Well, they created it, and we'll talk about it. So, what did the Washington Post have to say on September 18th about the bailout, the bridge loan that Hank Paulson and Ben Bernanke made to AIG? The headline said, stocks plummet as lending freezes up. The subheadline, lawmakers left on sidelines as Fed Treasury takes swift action. Let's read this. The frenetic pace of the financial crisis has forced the Treasury Department and Federal Reserve to make rapid-fire decisions in recent days, leaving Capitol Hill lawmakers effectively impotent and frustrated. Lawmakers on both sides expressed concern yesterday that they have had no control over when and how federal money has been used to curb the panic on Wall Street. Congressional leaders learned AIG rescue late Tuesday night during a hastily called meeting in the Capitol with Bernanke and Treasury Secretary Paulson, who explained the deal after it was done. What does this say to you? We've had a complete takeover of the whole entire government of the United States. It didn't start overnight. This has been happening since 1913, and you will see that. Bernanke and Paulson have taken the lead, and this is still the Washington Post, not only from lawmakers, but from President Bush. Bush has left direct management of the crisis to them and other advisors, and has limited his remarks on the economy. On Tuesday, he canceled plans to brief reporters after meeting with his economic advisors. Great president. America, bottom line, has been taken over by international bankers. See what it really is. This is not a sophisticated bailout by people who want to look like they're doing us a favor. The wolves are in the chicken coop, and we're the chicken coop. Is the world unraveling? Or is there a master plan? I suggest to you that there is a master plan. It went back to the Tower of Babel. Or maybe the Garden of Eden. Take your pick. A global structure is first needed to bring world government into control. And you know, God in His graciousness has allowed me to be an eyewitness since 1994 to the final pieces of the structure of world government. So what are global steps to a world governmental structure? You create a central bank. We'll explain that in a minute. You take America off the gold standard to debase our currency. You create an international level above the nation state. You tear down the barriers. It's called globalization. And you change the value of the monetary system, which eventually will lead to a cashless society. So, long before the barriers fell between the nations, there were a group of powerful and evil men who were planning to control the monetary system of the world. The concept of a central bank came from Sweden, which was the first to form a private corporation to lend to the government without a fixed time period for repayment. What do we really call that? We call that lending in perpetuity, where in fact the government of the countries of the world who have a central bank, that government and the people are in bondage to the central bank in perpetuity. No principal is being paid. The question is, why can't Americans forgive themselves, we the taxpayers, the interest on our debt? We don't owe it to us. We owe it to the Federal Reserve. And we are paying interest in perpetuity. Maybe we should ask, with all the bailouts, how much more interest we're going to be paying. We have no control. These are the years of the central banks of the world. When you get down towards the bottom, you see the Federal Reserve in 1913. We were a real holdout. You see the Bank of Canada in 1934. You see all the former communist countries during the 90s. Guess what? We invaded Iraq. Guess what they got? A central bank. The Federal Reserve Act, passed in 1913 at 11:45 p.m. on December 24th, after those who opposed it went home for Christmas. It shifted the responsibility of America's finances from Congress to a private corporation. Our Federal Reserve is not federal, nice sounding name, it's a lie. It's not federal and it has no reserves. Whenever we need money, all they're doing is printing it. And the paper money is on demand to lend to the U.S. government in the form of Treasury bills, notes, and bonds. You want to know what the safest investment is in the world? Believe it or not, they say Treasury notes, bonds, and bills. Senator Benton of Missouri said when this occurred, the government itself ceases to be independent and safe when the national currency is at the will of a company. All property is at their mercy, and that's exactly what we're seeing. The price of real estate, of every growing crop, of every staple article is at their command. Stocks are their playthings. The empowerment of the Federal Reserve. Since its inception in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act has been amended a minimum of 195 times. In 1999, they broadened the range of collateral that they would accept in order to lend more money. In March of this year, they agreed to take mortgages as collateral. Hello? Do you hear that the siphoning of the power and the foundation of America and the middle class? March 22nd, the Federal Reserve and the Treasury created a $30 billion line of credit for J.P. Morgan to buy Bear Stearns. This was the first action of this magnitude since the Great Depression. The Fed and Treasury took authority over Wall Street by replacing the Security and Exchange Commission. That was on March 22nd. The empowerment of the Federal Reserve is seen in the credit crises because their powers are being expanded greatly. We're going to talk about the Treasury blueprint. September 8th, the Federal Reserve took control of Fannie and Freddie. That is $5.4 trillion of mortgages. A portion of that, I don't remember if it's 10 or 12%, are subprime. Those poor people, they are poor and they're going to be poor, because their mortgage is going to be sold for 1 or 2 cents on the dollar to the new Resolution Trust for these vultures to take control of that property. September 15th, the Federal Reserve takes control of AIG. The actions that it took by someone on CNBC was termed, quote, a major change that will forever change Wall Street. So how could this happen to America? World government is borderless. So let's take a look at the world before 1945. We had all these various barriers that protected us from the rest of the world. We were sovereign in the finest sense of the world. And little by little, the economic barriers fell in 1944 when they started creating the international structure, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. The political barriers fell in 1945 with the establishment of the United Nations. In 1994, and it's not like there weren't other barriers, but we're just getting the really major ones. In 1994, the trade barriers fell when a lame duck Congress, just like the one we have now, which is going to pass a major funding bill to get the new resolution trust before Bush gets out of office, a lame duck Congress passed a 27,000-page document that they never even read the first page of, called the World Trade Organization. Well, it was General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, then it became the World Trade Organization. You tear down all the barriers between the nation states from a trading standpoint. That makes the little farmer in Iowa compete with the big farmer in Brazil. In 1998, the International Criminal Court was established. I was there. This was the first time in history since Rome that there is now an international legal body that can transcend the sovereignty of America to arrest any one of us who they say might be an alleged international terrorist. Then we have the financial. We really don't have time to go into the major points of the financial. We'll cover a few, but what was 9/11? The military and the intelligence barriers fell as a result of 9/11. Two of the most sensitive barriers fell. How in the world would you get a global army together? 9/11 did it, didn't it? How in the world would you get the KGB, MI6, and the CIA to cooperate unless it was something like 9/11? The effects to destroy value and transfer wealth to the people who are controlling the world. There are no barriers. This is the bottom line. We are independent. We are one. When you hear Clinton and Bush and everybody else, all those running, Obama, talk about interdependency, we're there. When you hear the word globalization, we're there. I was at a press briefing with Jon Snow in 2001. He said this. I wrote a whole entire newsletter on this one. We recognize that we are so interdependent that growth in Asia is important to us. And our growth is important to Japan, and Japan's growth is so important to the Euro nations and so on. So that we are all interconnected in ways that one nation's growth feeds and assists in other parts of the globe. Hello? If that wasn't a wake up for me, it was. What is globalization? No barriers between the nation states. That creates risk worldwide without protection, and the need to change national laws to conform to a world governmental structure. It's required change. And what was released in March was the Treasury blueprint to change regulatory laws governing stocks and bonds, mortgages, banking, insurance companies, and for the Fed to oversee Wall Street. Create crises. We are in a Lulu. So, in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act. In 1930, the Bank for International Settlements was set up. We'll talk about that. 1971, we'll briefly mention about Nixon taking our currency off of the gold standard. The 1980 Monetary Deregulation Act. 1999 is key. I wrote a large chapter in UN Global Straitjacket. I wrote a major economic newsletter on the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act because it opened the doors for today. And then the Treasury blueprint. The Bank for International Settlements. The apex, and this is what Carol Quigley said, tragedy and hope. The apex of financial capitalism was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central bankers, which were themselves private corporations. God in His mercy has allowed me in the 14 years that I've covered international meetings to go to the Bank for International Settlements about 7 or 8 times. They know my name, they know who I am. I've done major interviews with the economists and the managing director of the Bank for International Settlements, and this is where it all happens. What does the bank look like, the BIS? Almost every country, there are a few Muslim countries that do not have a central bank. But all of the countries of the world that have a central bank, and I couldn't put all the arrows up there, all the central banks meet at the Bank for International Settlements. So the Bank for International Settlements is at the top of all of the countries' central banks. And that's where they do all their thinking for what they're going to do next. The second thing that you have to do is destroy the monetary system. President Nixon did that when he took the dollar off the gold standard. So the dollar now floats against major currencies, the Deutschmark and the yen. Since 1971, our dollar has lost 66 to 70% against these two currencies. And this is just what you see. The world's being moved into trading blocks. The free trade areas of the Americas in our hemisphere, the European Union here, the Middle East, that's in the process of coming into fruition, the South Africa trading sphere, and the last will be the yen with Japan and Australia, Malaysia, and China. Third, you have to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act, H.R. 10. And as I said before, it started the credit crises that we now know. The Glass-Steagall Act was set in place in order to understand the magnitude in 1933 to separate what lawmakers said back then was the reason for the Great Crash. So they separated the functions of banking from the stock market. They put firewalls in place between commercial banking and investment banks. And this was all to protect you and me. When they passed the law to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act, it was called the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, after those eminent congresspeople. It ended up basically tearing down all the firewalls, putting us at risk, and then putting us in basically pre-1929 times. It also deregulated the securities industry, helping to create the current banking crises. The 1980 Monetary Deregulation Act. I remember thinking this was a great thing because what happened? My money market fund earned 18 to 20%. I thought, man, that's great. No, that was the apple. Okay? It opened our borders for investing and it eliminated the interest ceiling that banks had to pay. That's why today banks can charge up to 35% interest on the credit card, high rates on mortgages, and then pay you 0.5% to 1% on your savings. What it really did, for the first time since America was founded in 1776, almost 200 years later, Americans were able to invest overseas and foreigners were able to invest in America. If a lot of your international bankers are in England and Germany and France, you really need to have this if you're going to come in and rape, rob, and pillage. The mortgages. They set up a system for mortgages called securitization. So you go to your local bank or wherever it is now to get a mortgage. The bank makes the mortgage to you, but if they don't want to hold your mortgage for 30 years, they sell your mortgage either in the bond market or to organizations like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that paper was considered sterling, 5-star type paper. You would always have it. You wouldn't lose your money. You'd always get paid a little bit higher interest because of the compounding, and you'd get a little bit of principal back from the mortgages. It's fabulous. Sold to mutual funds, foreign governments, pension plans, profit sharing plans, sovereign wealth, and a lot of retirees. When it was moved into the conservatorship, no interest, and who knows if you will see your principal. This is what is happening in the housing market. And that brings us to the Treasury blueprint for modernizing our financial regulatory structure, authored by Hank Paulson himself and Robert Steele, two of the sheriffs of Wall Street. There we go. What does it do? Basically, it will move to the power and the authority of the Federal Reserve all the final pieces of any remaining financial sovereignty that America has. And it will do that, number one, by changing the federal banking charter. It will move for the first time, because every single one of these entities have a different banking charter, it will homogenize all of the different banking charters, whether it's a commercial bank, a bank holding company, a savings and loan, thrifts, and credit unions. They will now fall under the federal banking charter. And guess what? The Federal Reserve oversees all banking activities in America. The mortgage industry. It will create an oversight system for the entire mortgage industry, because 50% of the subprime loans, they say, were made without federal supervision, and that's why we're in the mess we're in. And it will create a mortgage origination commission. The Federal Reserve will sit on it. The insurance industry. For 135 years, every state has overseen every type of insurance activity. They will federalize the entire insurance industry, move it to the federal government, and they will create, I'm sure you can understand, an insurance commission, and the Federal Reserve will be given oversight on the insurance commission. They will also make the Federal Reserve responsibility for the entire payment and settlement system in the United States. A payment and settlement system is when you buy stock from this brokerage firm, you send your money to the brokerage firm. There is an intermediate company, a payment and settlement system, and when you send your money, there's a 3-day settlement. That stock then opens up an account for you, and you see what you bought in that account. Okay, most of you have brokerage accounts of some kind. Everything that happens, everything that is transacted in your brokerage account is through the payment and settlement system. The Federal Reserve is going to be given oversight. They will be made the market stability regulator. And what they've been doing is injecting a lot of liquidity into the system. They are looking to give us economic stability, they tell us, and they will take an expanded number of mortgages and other kinds of assets as collateral. And you can see here in March, they lent a total of $436 billion. They took control of Fannie and Freddie. They made a bridge loan to AIG. They opened just Tuesday or Wednesday. For the first time, they opened a 24-hour access worldwide to central bank funds. And they also injected, this was $180 billion yesterday. This morning it's $300 billion into the global system. Okay? They're busy printing treasury bills. Why? Everybody thinks they're as safe as the federal government. Okay? Again, they are transferring the last vestiges of our economic sovereignty that they do not currently have control over. The other thing they're doing is they're creating a global central bank. And I've been watching for this for the last 14 years. And it's been coming, and I've seen it, but not enough to say, here it is. I've written about it, and I basically said the Bank for International Settlements was going to be the world central bank. And here it is, Financial Times, 12 of 03. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of England make a joint assault. This article was a letter to the editor of the Financial Times on August 11th, 2008. Time to turn the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, into a global central bank. I said, yep, there it is. A global central bank, the Bank for International Settlements. So what have we seen? We are seeing now in the infusion of a large amount of capital globally. In December, it was the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan. In September, it was a few more central banks with the promise that Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan would aid Japan, Australia, and India. That was the second infusion. Then we had the mortgage crises in March, and central banks worldwide were looking to see what they could do. September 16th, we had 11 international banks create a $77 billion fund so that any type of international bank that was going to get in trouble could go there and get bailed out. And so you see some of the large central banks there: Bank of America, Barclays, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, Royal Bank of Scotland, Citigroup, Merrill Lynch. They're all there. What did Karl Marx say? Karl Marx said, "By means of the banking system, the distribution of capital is taken out of the hands of the private capitalists and users. But at the same time, banking and credit thus become the most effective means of driving capitalistic production beyond its own boundaries, and one of the most potent instruments of crises and swindles." Believe me, I've been overtaken this week as I put this together. The result of Fed empowerment, as the Washington Post said, Paulson and Bernanke have taken the lead not only from lawmakers but from President Bush. Bush has left direct management of the crises to them. In summary, there's no way I can ever summarize all of the ramifications. I can tell you some of them that I think, but there'll be far more. Over the last 95 years, the Congresses and the Presidents of the United States have voted away their powers to the Federal Reserve, rendering themselves powerless and ineffectual in stopping any crises or the raping, robbing, and pillaging of America. For the first time, America's assets are unprotected, opening her up to any type of manipulation from more powerful forces. The Federal Reserve has unlimited money. They print it, we pay interest on it, and thereby creating perpetual debt. We are there. Every aspect of the financial system is under total control by evil people who will direct and can oversee and determine any and all buying and selling. Is this prophetic? We are there. This is, again, the first time since Rome the world has effectively been moved under total control of people who oppose truth. The lies, the deceit, the deception, the distortion on ABC, NBC, CBS, any other station I forgot to mention, including the Business Channel, is unparalleled. I listen to them and I just shake my head. For the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 computers going. One to buy and sell securities for my clients, and by the way, I moved them out of the market gradually over the last 6 weeks. And over here to transcribe the lies, the deceit, the deception, the distortion that I heard in major interviews on CNBC. We are there. We are on target now. They're taking control of the entire regulatory system. They're printing money in a way that they never have before. They're bringing us into total bondage, and we are on target for a global tax. You listen very carefully to Obama. Obama has suggested a 28% capital gains tax whenever you sell your house. At this point, it's if and when you can sell your house. Global stock exchange, I've been writing and talking about that for years, going as far back as 1998. A global accounting system. The Securities and Exchange Commission has just agreed to install or change from generally agreed accounting principles, GAAP, here in the US, to international accounting principles by 2014. Global currency. Let me just talk as we wind up of regional currencies. The euro was the first area, 15 countries, to be moved into the European Union. And they adopted their currency, the euro, a joint currency in 1999. We talked about these other countries. The free trade areas of the Americas was begun in 1994 by President Clinton. I missed the first meeting, but I went to 2 of the free trade areas of the Americas meetings. And it was there at the second meeting that I learned that they would be looking to have a common currency for our entire hemisphere. How do you think they're going to do this and get the American people to agree, except to have a major credit crisis? Okay? When you change the value of our currency, you debase our currency, and you and I will never, ever be able to, if you will, live free. During an interview with former Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker several years ago, he told me we need a global currency. In order to have a global currency, you have to first create a regional currency, the Amero, or that's what everybody says it's going to be called for our hemisphere, the euro, and then the combination of the yen and the yuan. From there, you can then go to possibly the special drawing right, which is a basket of 5 currencies, and is considered the form of currency for the Bank for International Settlements and for the International Monetary Fund. So I think the special drawing right, or a basket of currency, is where we're going. So there's going to be a whole lot of fallout between now and then. What is our response? Our response, why are you here? For such a time as this. Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. He is the truth. No man comes to the Father but by him. It is our personal relationship and our faith in Jesus that is going to carry us to places that we haven't been before. This is not the beginning of the end. This really is the beginning of the beginning for such a time as this. It's no longer your money. It's no longer your paid home. It's no longer your retirement income. It's no longer your brain or your knowledge. It's Jesus. This is the day. This is the hour. And each one of us will have to search our hearts to determine how we stand, when we stand, and if we stand. Thank you. It has been 40 days since the preceding presentation was made. During that time, there have been a whole multitude of complex situations that have arisen. Today is October 29th. It is the 79th anniversary of the 1929 crash. We just happen to be doing an update. Let me read you from the Washington Post. The bread lines didn't form overnight. The banks didn't buckle all at once. And no one, despite urban legend, is known to have jumped out of a window in sorrow over financial ruin. Instead, the worst would come later, sometimes months and even years after October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday. On that date, 79 years ago today, few people could conceive that an economic apocalypse was gathering, even as the ominous news soaked in. But the ripples would soon begin. We are going to be talking today in an update to the first presentation about ripples. Am I saying that this is a 1929? Oh Lord, I pray not. But things look extremely serious. The question is, what is happening? What does it mean for me? And what should I be doing? I cannot answer all those questions, but I can give you insight, I can give you information, and I can help you formulate your thoughts and your ideas, and of course, especially your prayers. So with that, let's just take a look at where we are today. There appears to be a totally unraveling of money, credit, life, and government as we have known it. It appears to be a planned and managed destruction. And you'll see in a little while why I am using that phrase, planned and managed destruction of the value of money and society that is leading to a new structure for how the world will be governed. Some call it, such as Joseph Schumpeter, the economist, creative destruction. Mr. Schumpeter said this, quote, "The essential point to grasp in dealing with capitalism, we are dealing with an evolutionary process. Capitalism can never be stationary. This fact is important, and these changes, such as war, revolutions, and so on, often condition industrial change." He wrote that in his book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy in 1942. Alan Greenspan, who is a proponent of creative destruction, wrote this in his book, Age of Turbulence. Quote, "Working with heavy industry gave me a profound appreciation of the central dynamic of capitalism. Creative destruction is an idea that was articulated by Joseph Schumpeter in 1942. Like many powerful ideas, his is simple. A market economy will incessantly revitalize itself from within by scraping old and falling businesses and then reallocating resources to newer, more productive ones. I read Schumpeter in my 20s and always thought he was right. And I've watched the process through my entire career." So what happens when you take the old away? You end up, as George Bush Sr. said in 1990 at the United Nations, with a new world order. He basically said this in his speech. "Until now, the world we have known has been a divided world. A world of barbed wire and concrete block, conflict, or Cold War. Now we can see a new world order coming into view. Let me say that this was after the Berlin Wall fell, and they say communism was effectively dead. He was saying that we are in a new world order. But he's not the only one to use that phrase. David Dupuy said at the World Economic Forum in January 2003, quote, "One of the problems we have is that we have a global world and a global market, but are still governed by national rules and national leaders. You cannot solve
problems without international solutions. As we go on, you will see that there is a global solution that has come to fore as a result of all the turbulence of the past 40 days. James Warburg said to the United States Senate in 1950, quote, "We shall have world government whether or not we like it. The only question is whether the world government will be achieved by consent or conquest." Maybe we should ask, in light of the economic situation today, if it is indeed through economic conquest. In other words, we are there. We are in some type of new world order. It is beginning to appear. It is beginning to become common knowledge. What are the events between September 19th and October 24th? First, we are in a sea change of the century. Those are my words. A complete shift, a complete turnover of life as we have known it, a complete change in rules. We no longer are just in the subprime crisis, as was mentioned in August of 2007. We are now in a global credit crisis. We have had a bailout. $700 billion was the cost of the bailout, with sweeteners so lawmakers could tell their constituents that they're working on their behalf. The total price tag so far comes to $1 trillion. And then we have the Treasury blueprint for a modernized financial regulatory structure, which was issued in March of 2008. And with the blueprint comes not only a whole series of global regulations, but also the complete empowerment of the Federal Reserve. We see in September 16th, stocks plunge as the crisis intensifies, a momentum. Senator Shelby said when he said on October 2nd that he was voting against the bailout, he said, "I opposed this because back in 1995 I opposed the Community Reinvestment Act." That is what led to the subprime crises. He opposed the Financial Modernization Act, otherwise known as the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. He opposed Basel II Capital Accord, and he wanted oversight of Fannie and Freddie, which did not happen. For our purposes today to understand aspects of what is happening, we're going to take a look again at the Gramm-Leach-Bliley, and we're going to look at what Basel II is. When we talk about the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, you will recall that that was passed in 1933 by two congressmen, Glass and Steagall. The whole purpose was to protect the investor against the wiles of the market. By repealing it in 1999, we are now told that it caused the current financial crises. We are also told that we need a new global regulatory system, and that is the reason for the blueprint. Now, in repealing the Glass-Steagall Act, let's just take a look at what we were told when it was passed. We were told that it would enhance competition in the financial services industry to foster innovation and efficiency. We are told that it would ensure the continued safety and soundness of depository institutions, that it would provide necessary and appropriate protections for investors, that it would avoid duplicative, potentially conflicting, and overly burdensome regulatory framework. It would enhance our competitiveness internationally, and it would ensure compliance with the provisions of the Community Regulatory Act of 1997 to meet capital and credit needs of all citizens, in other words, to make loans to people who we have subsequently found could not pay for their mortgage. So these were all the reasons in 1999 why the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed and replaced with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. Looking backwards, we can see what a pathetic decision that was. the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act also shifted regulatory powers from the Treasury to the Federal Reserve. And that was in the June 18th, 2008 Washington Times. So we can see, if you will, a whole host of sins. So, besides the Glass-Steagall Act, we want to review the Bank for International Settlements. As we mentioned earlier, almost every country in the world has a central bank, a private corporation that controls and manages the monetary system of that country. All the countries that have dots, basically I am conveying that these are all the central banks of the world. So they meet. Their apex, as we discussed earlier, is the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. And there at the Bank for International Settlements, you will see that we are talking a very powerful organization. When we look at the global actors above the nation state, if you will just study this slide for a moment, the Bank for International Settlements, because it undergirds the entire financial system of the world, is central, center, and key. Underneath it, and this is a chart that I put together based on my extensive research, is the Group of 8, a number of non-governmental organizations like the International Chamber of Commerce, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the World Economic Forum, the Prince of Wales International Business Leaders Forum, and other groups like the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, etc. Underneath these key organizations, all working in many regards for a world governmental structure, is the United Nations, and then other aspects of the global infrastructure, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, UNESCO, and UNTAD. So the Bank for International Settlements is front and center. As such, it has a very extensive body of committees behind it. The Financial Stability Institute, for example, that assists the financial sector in regulatory and supervisory authorities worldwide. It looks to strengthen regulatory oversight. Then you have the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, and that is where we get the Basel II Accords that we're going to talk about in a second. With regard to the Bank for International Settlements, there's the Committee on the Global Financial System, comprised of the G10 central banks, and the Committee on Payment and Settlements, which the New York Federal Reserve Chairman Timothy Geithner is the chairman of. There are many other aspects of the Bank for International Settlements, but for the time being, this will work very well. Basel II are a set of rules and regulations that were developed at the Bank for International Settlements. The committee is called the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. And as such, the Basel II demanded that international banks have higher amounts of capital requirements. In other words, if a bank was going to make so many loans, they needed to have a higher level of capital to support those loans. That they should have stringent supervisory review and supervisory market discipline. Basel II originally only applied to international banks like Goldman Sachs or Citicorp. But it has become, in today's society and environment, required for all banks. That means that your smaller banks and your mid-sized banks are now going to have to adopt minimum capital requirements that were only designed for the much larger international banks. As such, that will create substantial problems for the banking community, and it will force mergers. Today there are 9,000 banks, and it is expected that within the next 5 years, those banks will be reduced by 50% to about 4,500 banks. In 1998, when I covered the annual meeting of the Bank for International Settlements, then Managing Director Andrew Crockett said this about Basel II, quote, "We have supervisory regulatory responsibilities that are first of all divided on national grounds, inevitable when you have nation states. What we are recognizing in a global financial market is that the boundaries between different categories of institutions are becoming blurred, which creates the multiplicity of organizational forms that need to be regulated and supervised." In that press briefing, I asked Mr. Crockett this question: who do the supervisors report to, these people who are going to supervise banks? And he said, well, this is a good question, a question to which there is no answer. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision reports to the governors of the group of 10 countries. It is not a formalized arrangement. So, we have the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, and we have, as part of the Bank for International Settlements, something called the Financial Stability Forum, which was begun in 1999. The Financial Stability Forum, in my opinion, is a global regulator already. And even, in fact, I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe that the Treasury blueprint for a modernized financial regulatory system will basically fit in very nicely to the structure of the Financial Stability Forum, which is comprised of the G7 central bank ministers, the G7 Treasury secretaries, the G7 regulatory agencies like the Comptroller of the Currency and the Security and Exchange Commission, and then other groups and organizations around the world, such as the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, which is at the Bank for International Settlements, the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the International Organization of Security Commissions, and last but not least, the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. We see a situation that in July, the Federal Reserve, the central bank, started warning about the economy and things to come. Here we have October 2, the Senate approves that $700 billion bailout. The blueprint for a modernized financial regulatory structure, you will recall, says that the Federal Reserve will take oversight and control over 4 areas that they currently don't have: the credit unions, the mortgage industry, the insurance industry, and the payment and settlement system. They will also become the market stability regulator. So, when we take a look at the banking industry, which includes bank holding companies, savings and loan thrifts, and credit unions, we can see that if there have been a number of banks that have already had problems, and they've either been sold, or they went out of business, or they've been merged with either domestic or international organizations. Whether it's Bear Stearns, that was sold to J.P. Morgan, Merrill Lynch, which was purchased by Bank of America, and Lehman Brothers, that went into bankruptcy, and part of its assets were purchased by a foreign bank, Barclays. So you can see with just all of those things that there's also a need for regulation to catch up with action. In the mortgage industry, we're going to take a look at the fact that everything that should have been put in place to guard the mortgage industry has not. It will be set up an oversight system for the mortgage industry and a mortgage origination commission. And of course, with the seizing of Fannie and Freddie by the U.S. government, the nationalization of Fannie and Freddie, if you will, the bottom line is we're already on the road to this being done already. In the insurance industry, they're going to switch the entire oversight of the insurance industry from the state level to the federal level. And in order to lead the way, we had AIG. AIG is an international organization. They are involved worldwide in insurance and asset management and financial services, whether it's in the Caribbean or Europe or Latin America or Asia. AIG was the largest insurer in the world. It operated in all 50 states. And on September 17th, when the federal government gave them an $85 billion bridge loan, it basically was nationalized. We're going to see again through the blueprint that the need for insurance regulation to go to the federal level, i.e. the Federal Reserve. We are also seeing that the bailout is expanding to insurers besides just banks and insurance companies. There's many other insurance companies that will be needing help. Lastly, we see that the blueprint says the Federal Reserve should become market stability regulator, and you can see on the screen that they've already taken many actions to make them the market stability regulator. They've put a lot of money into the system. They've authorized swap lines with other central banks for dollars worldwide. They're auctioning more money or treasury bills to provide liquidity into our system. They're working with other central banks around the world. So in essence, the Federal Reserve is already the market stability regulator. We are seeing with all the action going on globally the rise of global central banks. Not only the individual central banks of the world, the key central banks of the world, but as I mentioned earlier, the Bank for International Settlements. We are also seeing that people like Alan Greenspan, who was considered the maestro, the man who could do no wrong as Federal Reserve Chairman, said on October 24th, as he testified before our House, Congressman Henry Waxman said to Alan Greenspan, quote, "You found that your view of the world, your ideology, was not right. It was not working?" Alan Greenspan said, quote, "Absolutely, precisely. You know, that's precisely the reason I was shocked, because I have been going for 40 years or more with very considerable evidence that it was working exceptionally well." Creative destruction. Creative destruction also means planned and managed destruction. How could this happen in a country like America? Well, all we have to do is look at the newspapers, because the newspapers as early as April have been talking about global financial regulation. They're also talking about the newest Business Week. Not only are they saying that we have problems with our regulation, they are also saying that what is at stake is the future of capitalism. Capitalism is no longer spelled in the front cover of Business Week with a C, but it is spelled with a K. Alice Rivlin said recently that even the structure of government would have to change. So, what do we have in conjunction? What do we have in conclusion? Very simply this. There are many things that are going on, many things that are disconcerting, many things of change that are occurring. And on the screen you will read 13 summaries of the time that we have spent together to explain to you a very complex situation that is affecting each one of us, our future, our lives, our savings, where will we live, where we will work. It is virtually affecting every aspect. So, how do we live? In difficult times, there has always been people of faith. And now is no different than at any other time in history where we have not had any type of peace, but we have had challenges. We are in a very challenging time. And we must move and not stay in any type of fear. We must walk in faith, knowing that the God who creates heaven and earth, the God who sits on the edge of the earth, as Isaiah tells us, certainly knows what is happening and is in control. Let me end with these words from Isaiah 43. The God who made you says, Do not be afraid, for I have brought you and made you free. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The fire will not destroy you, for I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, who saves you. And that is how we must face the future. In all the things that are happening, whether it is how high our mortgage is, how high our credit cards are, how low our savings has fallen because it's in the market, we must trust God, we must seek Him, and above all, we must call on His name. Thank you.